97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast.
I love coaching this football team. I love coaching those players in there.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia studios, it's Football at 4.
You know, the NFL is still happening all around the league, even though the Eagles have a bye week. In fact, Josh McCown, who was the Eagles' emergency quarantine quarterback, if you will, he has been signed by the Houston Texans. Matt Stafford has been put on the COVID list for the Detroit Lions, so there's a lot going on in the NFL. It's Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Geoff Mosher is in the house today. We got plenty of football to dive into. The Eagles at the midway point. And, Geoff, we'll start with this. You know, earlier today, I don't know that you heard this, but Keyshawn Johnson was, during KJZ this morning, suggested that he does not see Carson Wentz ending his career in an Eagles uniform. It has sparked a lot of conversation, and a lot of people seem to agree. So I'll ask you, you see Wentz as a lifelong Eagle?
No, and that has nothing to do with what's going on right now with him and his struggle. I mean, Donovan McNabb had a great career, but was not a lifelong Eagle. Tom Brady was not a lifelong New England Patriot. Joe Montana was not a lifelong San Francisco 49er. So most quarterbacks are not lifelong members of the team that drafted them. Even Brett Favre. I mean, the list goes on, and we'll see what happens with Aaron Rodgers later in his career. Drew Brees is he's not with the team that drafted him.
All right, so, let's ask it in this manner. Does he play some of his better years in another uniform? Or is it like Donovan McNabb, where they just kind of at the end of the road said, all right, we think it's time to move on?
Well, that's a great question. Does he play better years? Insinuates, does he go somewhere else because he's cut by the Eagles, or they move on and he has
or trade him
better seasons? I don't know. I mean, that's a tough call right now. I mean, obviously, if the trajectory remains the same, he's not going to be an Eagle for the next 3 years. But there's a lot of football left to play between this year and next year. And we'll see. Some of this is on Carson Wentz. You know, if he went somewhere else, would that be a wake-up call for him to play the game a little bit differently, to do things differently? Would a different kind of coach get through to him? These are all questions that are very, I guess, philosophical more than ones that we can directly answer.
Yeah, and I guess we don't really know. Maybe you have some more insight on what they look at Jalen Hurts as. Do they just say, hey, he's just a backup quarterback? Do they look at him as a starter down the road? I mean, I guess that plays a big role into their decisions on Wentz. What do they think about Hurts down the road?
Yes, and also, I think it's fair if we're going to open up that kind of discussion, right, about moving on from Carson Wentz, then we're doing that under the assumption that there's been some implosion that continues. And at that point, we have to say, well, who's then the GM and the head coach, and what other changes have gone on within the organization that would lead us to believe that Jalen Hurts is even the natural successor to Carson Wentz. I mean, we're talking about a whole, look at the Jets, right? I mean, Sam Darnold has not been good. Joe Douglas is in year 2. Adam Gase might get fired. They may have Trevor Lawrence next year. So anybody who's wondering right now about the future of Sam Darnold, it may not even matter about a new head coach for them. And I would say the same for the Eagles. They drafted Jalen Hurts, and they were very clear that they drafted him to be a backup quarterback because they thought that there was more value to having a cost-controlled backup quarterback in 2020 and beyond than there ever has been. They never once said that he was a guy they saw as a potential long-term starter. And frankly, even if you don't believe that, from my knowledge, they didn't put the same kind of homework into scouting him and drafting him and really getting to know him the way they did Carson Wentz when they decided that Carson Wentz was going to be their franchise quarterback for a long time. So I think we're all in a big state of uncertainty about their quarterback situation and the whole franchise rule situation until we see how this year plays out.
One of the big issues with Carson Wentz is clearly the hero ball. Is it concerning that he mentions in one of his press conferences that, he's not changing? This is who he is.
Yeah, that is the big discussion. He made a comment that is very hard to, I guess, really pin him down to what exactly he was thinking. He said something like, I know I have to eliminate the turnovers. A lot of that's on me, but I'm still going to give my guys chances to make plays, and we're still going to work this out, almost insinuating that he's not the only one responsible for some of these turnovers, or that it's a communication and a chemistry problem more so than a bad decision problem. But this is a discussion I think all of us here, us at Inside the Birds, people around the media, fans have had for going back more than a year now about Carson's decision-making and his turnover problems.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It dropped this morning at 6 a.m. You mentioned the Jets, and I'm interested because if they get the first pick of the draft, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence, which means they'd have Sam Darnold. And we've mentioned that's a tradable guy, and there's a lot of teams that I feel like are in play because they have older starting quarterbacks who are going to draft at the back end of the draft, like Tampa Bay or Pittsburgh or Indianapolis or New Orleans. Does Howie Roseman capitalize on that too, saying, look, you got an older quarterback, I got a guy in his prime? Is now the time to think about moving him?
I don't see that happening. I mean, unless things go real south and this team finishes, with 4 or 5 wins and they feel like they need to move on and they're in a position.
Certainly doable, and you could be 4 or 5 wins and possibly win your division. So that would really cloud some things.
Yeah, I don't know if they would look at that as a big overall win, making the playoffs with 4 or 5 wins and then getting bounced really quickly. So, but I also don't know that puts them in the position where they're high enough to consider this younger wave of quarterbacks or want to hand the keys over to Jalen Hurts either. So they're kind of in that neutral territory where they either have to figure out a way to fix Carson Wentz or try to restart over with frankly some of the issues that they've had that are not just Carson Wentz related. And how many different guys have they brought in to fix this offense over the last year and a half, 2 years, and the offense has not been fixed. So, there's that too. So that's why it goes back to, well, who's the coach, who's the GM, who's making these decisions, and what leads to those decisions being made? How bad will the Eagles be by the end of this year?
Now, 8 games in this year, they're 3-4-1. If you're doing a midseason report card of Carson Wentz, this year has been so wild, and it's hard because it's his 5th year. He's 27 years old, and you would almost say this season, we looked at the numbers, they're almost identical to his rookie year, but he's almost been worse this year than he was as a rookie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's been worse. No question about it. And, he would not get a passing grade from me. Probably something in the D range. Now, I got to ask you guys a real quick question about this. I'm gonna have a plug here. Grillin' the Birds comes out tomorrow on our YouTube channel and podcast platform. It's with Derek Gunn and Trey Thomas. They did their own mid-season grades. And there were a couple of D pluses and D minuses thrown out there. Now, I don't know what school those guys went to, but in my school, there was never a D plus or a D minus. There was only A, B, C, plus and minus, and then D and F. Did you guys ever hear of a D plus or a D minus?
Yes, I've had the D plus and D minus.
Yeah, I think I've.
No, I've never personally had
D
those
minus.
grades,
I don't think I've had. I think a D plus has been in my past at one point or another.
West Virginia days?
Yeah, absolutely. But
that sounds like a real West Virginia education type of thing to do, I got to say.
Like I said, I think I would give Wentz somewhere between a C minus and a D plus. Like, he's been that bad for me. Doug Pederson, I put him in the D plus category.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. Now, I personally, whatever grade you're giving Carson, I'm not giving Doug an equal grade. I don't think Doug has been as bad as Carson. I heard Hunter say that earlier when you guys were talking to Jason Fitz, and I will challenge that to the T. I'm not going to stand here and tell you Doug Pederson has done an excellent job, and I've got issues with it. But if you look at these turnovers, many of them are on first and second down, many of them in quarters 1 through 3. So you're not necessarily getting teed off on by the defense, and they're important situational downs, many time run downs where you have an opportunity to play action. And these are Carson Wentz making really, really bad decisions. And I've seen plenty of open receivers that Carson Wentz has not hit in every single game. For me to say that for me to argue that Carson is doing a worse job than Doug, that's where I'm coming from it.
All right, well, I want to get your opinion on this because we keep saying, how do we fix Wentz, right? Like, we got to fix Carson Wentz. And I know that the conversation between DeFilippo and Press Taylor has been discussed a lot and it's being stressed. Is that something that should be as stressed as it is, or are we overblowing the relationship between him and the quarterbacks coach? Like, is that something that can truly fix Carson Wentz, that relationship? Is that where we start?
It's a great question, Hunter. And if you go back and you almost want to go back to 2017 and wonder if all of our eyes played tricks on us. In other words, did having the same set of weapons around him being pretty good too. You have Ertz, you have Torrey Smith, you have Alshon Jeffrey, you have an offensive line that for the most part stayed intact until Jason Peters got hurt. And then you had a triumvirate of pretty good running backs there to help move the chains. Was all that set up perfectly for Carson Wentz to just hit on so many big plays, which is what he did that year? If you look at his completion percentage, it was only 60.2. It's actually the lowest of his career until this year. It's at 58.4. So it's not like he was some super accurate quarterback in 2017, but he only threw 7 interceptions. But again, you wonder if that's just the byproduct of having greatness all around him and everything going right that year from an offensive standpoint, or if it was really that DeFilippo was really able to get into his head. And now I have to question that as well, because he just hasn't been like that since. I mean, in 2018, he had a much higher completion percentage and only 7 interceptions in 11 games, but it still wasn't 2017. So the question of how to fix him to me is mind-boggling. I think that we've all talked about the fact that Doug Pederson himself and Press Taylor, they're not particularly hard on him. And we know that. We've heard that. We've been told that. They don't sit there and go rah-rah and hold him as accountable verbally, I guess, in the classroom as others have, as maybe DeFilippo has. But the bottom line is, as Carson Wentz is, someone shouldn't have to yell at you to get you to realize that your numbers suck right now. You have to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing that's wrong? And so if the tough talk or the not so tough talk, whatever, from the coaches is not getting through, then the only thing that's left to me is action. And while I wouldn't advocate benching Carson Wentz, and I wrote about this today on InsideTheBirds.com, maybe there's, and Adam Kaplan brought this up, and I think it's a good idea, maybe you start playing Jalen Hurts for more than one play. Maybe you play him for a series, and you can say that you're just doing it to kind of throw a curveball into the offense like you intended to with Jalen Hurts, but have Carson watch from the sideline for, a minute or two while somebody else has the reins to the offense, and, see what happens if Jalen Hurts moves the chains a little bit because of it. And we all know how Carson Wentz felt when he got injured and Nick Foles was winning games and a Super Bowl without him. Maybe you stir something up inside of him. Maybe it just registers in his head that if he keeps doing what he's doing, there's going to be more series for Jalen Hurts going forward. And then that creates some tension and some job security, wonderment for him.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast, of course, Football at 4. You just mentioned Doug was asked, I don't remember him ever being asked about benching Wentz, but he was asked for the first time. He said he never considered it, and you just kind of threw that scenario out there. But my question is, in reality, there's not a scenario where they're benching Carson Wentz, correct?
No, I don't believe that to be true. I don't think there was ever a consideration, nor should there have been, in benching him against the Cowboys, because I never felt that they were going to lose that game. And we've seen Carson a couple of weeks in a row, right, just have better fourth quarters and win. But, they got a stretch of games, Cleveland, Seattle, Green Bay, right? New Orleans, Arizona. And if he plays as lousy against those teams as he does, what if he plays as really lousy and has 3 picks in the first half against the Giants coming out of the bye after you just spent, 2 off weeks trying to figure out the problem? I'll not slam the door on the idea. I do think Doug is finally echoing frustration, like rock bottom frustration with the turnovers. You can hear that in his press conferences.
What about the weapons and stuff around him? We brought up earlier the fact that has constantly changed. The line has been a big problem. He's constantly has new guys in there. How much is that factored into the poor play from Wentz?
Well, I think that it's involved with some of it, but I can go through, turnover upon turnover that Carson Wentz has had this year, and a lot of them are not on the offensive line. Going back to game one where he was hit a lot, and you can say that was difficult for him, but the 2 interceptions that he threw against Washington, there was an out route to Rager. He put it on the inside shoulder instead of the outside shoulder. It was first down. He had no pressure coming at him. Same thing with Hightower, who didn't run a great route. I mean, you go to week 2, the one he threw to Arcega-Whiteside in the end zone, trying to wedge it between 2 guys when he could have just thrown the ball away. He was outside of the pocket, had time, to this last game where, I mean, he rolls to the right. There's nothing there. All you got to do is flick the ball out of bounds and live to see another down. And instead he takes a hit, 30 yards away from where he originally the ball was snapped. That's not on the offensive line. That's on Carson Wentz and his decisions.
I want to get your thoughts. Like when there's so many plays where Carson Wentz is throwing the ball to Hightower that gets picked off, or Jalen Rager double-teamed in the end zone when the winds are gusting around. I mean, the miles per hour was insane. Is that a game plan philosophy out of Doug Pederson? Like, hey, we're going to take these shots in the wind and we're going to go deep against this Cowboys team when we don't really need to? Or is that a Carson Wentz decision that's so poor?
Well, I would have to think it's a Carson Wentz decision. Every play call, not every single play call, but most play calls have 3 or 4 or 5 different outlets. Sometimes you'll go heavy up front, like the fumble that he had, the first fumble was really just a 2-man route because it was a play action. They were trying to show run. But either way, most options, there's 3, 4, 5. And so what I'm trying to say is you have a deep option, you have an intermediate option, you have a couple of, guys in the flats. So Carson has 3, 4, or 5 different guys he can throw to. And as you see with some of these throws, he's not always throwing to guys who are wide open. He's giving guys a chance to catch the ball, but throwing it up in the air, as you're mentioning, on a night where the wind is pretty much playing tricks with the ball. That's not on Doug. Doug can't just design a play call, right, where all 3, 4, or 5 receivers run 5 yards and come back to the ball. That's just not an effective or sensible way to run an offense. At that point, you can do that. You might as well just run the ball every single play. So, I mean, you need certain routes to clear safeties. You need certain routes to set up what you're doing underneath. So ultimately, it's the trigger man's decision to find the open man or throw a guy open or get rid of the ball.
Dallas Goedert, he was in the offense, but only 1 target. What do you see? Because you figure that Goddard's role would have been a big role. I mean, he had 9 targets in week 1, over 100 yards. When he came back, I was excited to see him and Fulgham and Rager all together and Ward, and he didn't seem to be a part of the offense.
Yeah, he only had 2 targets, officially 1 in the stat sheet because I think the first one was negated by a penalty. I did notice in tape watch that he was an inline blocker on a lot of the running plays, which that's what he's good at. And plus, the guy had missed several weeks in a row, so you wonder how much conditioning he had to keep running out there. It's a little bit easier to kind of get your legs back a little bit when you're planted on the offensive line and you're just coming off and making a block on a zone or zone run like that. So that's what I believe, just been watching, was probably the reason why you didn't see him targeted as much. He wasn't running as many routes. And also the offense wasn't very functional for the first 2 or 3 quarters. They were constantly behind the sticks. They had penalties. They had some bad plays, but they did have some good runs, and he was a big part of that.
What'd you think of Jalen Rager? His stat sheet won't pop, but he had the touchdown, the 2-point conversion. There was some pre-snap movement that I really liked where they got the ball to him in space so he was able to work with the speed. And then he made a man miss on I believe it was 2nd and 6, and he got the first down. So the stat sheet doesn't pop, but I liked what I saw. What'd you think?
No, I totally agree with you on that. I thought he catches a touchdown. You see the balance that he maintains. He's coming from out of the backfield on it. So I like the way that they used him as far as moving him around, getting him in motion. He caught sort of like a tunnel screen type pass also on the left side. And I think you're going to see that a lot more going forward. I would like to see him make that touchdown catch. I know the ball was a little bit back shoulder there. He turned around. It's not necessarily an easy catch to make, but it looked like he had both hands on the ball and was not able to bring it in. So you would like to see him be able to do that. But the one thing you'll notice about him, and I think this is going to be pretty fun to watch because there's not been much fun to watch so far, is that both he and Fulgham possess not only, they're not only good route runners and athletic, but they are play strength kind of guys. I mean, they really are strong with the ball in their hands, kind of explosive. You saw Fulgham catch a ball on stiff arm. Was it Trayvon Diggs, I think, to get more yards. You've seen that a lot out of Fulgham, and that's something that we haven't seen much out of Rager because he's been hurt, but you saw it a lot on his college tape. He catches the ball, he turns upfield, he can take some contact and fight it off. And, you go look at Eagles receivers in the past, whether it's, Deshaun Jackson or Macklin, Kevin Curtis had a 1,000-yard season. You really haven't seen a lot of those well-rounded, guys who can be physical and fast at the same time. Alshon Jeffrey has been a physical receiver throughout his career, not necessarily fast. And I would even say he played more of a physical brand of football with Chicago than he has with the Eagles. But I like the fact that they have this young duo of guys who can go get the ball and make yards after contact.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Real quick, I want to flip to that linebacker spot because that was a common conversation about the problems. And at the midway point, are they as big a problem? And I guess the question would be, has Nate Geary, this injury, did he get Wally pipped?
Well, I don't know if he got Wally pipped or if it was bound to happen anyway because he was playing so poorly.
They don't think that.
Yeah, that's what they don't say.
All right.
But, we'll see. We'll see when he because he's not going to be out for 7 weeks or anything. So we'll see when he comes back if he gets immediately thrown back into the starting lineup. I'll say this. I think that while they've played better, there were some things that I saw on tape against the Cowboys where I was still concerned about, their run fits and their ability to get to the ball and not get suckered by play action. You saw the Cowboys do a lot of that, razzle-dazzle kind of stuff. And not all of it worked, but sometimes it did. And I think the Eagles have kind of gotten by the last 2 weeks on playing the Giants and the Cowboys, who are really not equipped to hit him where it hurts. Ingram's a good tight end, but he was covered mostly by Mills and Parks. But you saw in the first 5 weeks that they were highly exploitable with a lot of play action, a lot of misdirection. And the Eagles last 2 weeks have just been playing teams that are just trying to be able to line up correctly, block correctly, and get a few yards every down. So once we get back into the meat of their schedule, I'm not so certain that, we'll be talking about the linebackers not being a deficiency the way we have the last 2 games.
He's Geoff Mosher. Make sure you check out the Inside the Birds podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It drops at 6 a.m. And the Inside the Birds pregame show, Inside the Birds TV. They've also got other great shows with Derek Gunn and Trey Thomas and a whole lineup of guys that pump out great content over at InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast right here during Football at 4. Every day, 4 o'clock. Adam Kaplan's up tomorrow, Jeff's back on Friday. A lot of football. It's a big week in the NFL, midway point, and Geoff Mosher, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Jeff, take care, pal.
Have a great rest of your day, fellas. Stay safe.